Good morning. It's a wonderful day, bright and sunny, just the kind of day I like to do these recordings. And I am so excited because the first snippet we had, there were a good number of responses, which encourages me to keep on going with the snippets throughout this summer. They won't be quite weekly, but they'll be pretty close, maybe 1 to 1.5, one every 1 to 1.5 weeks. So just keep looking. We are doing our last sandwich, and I know you have enjoyed those sandwiches. And this is the last one I'm going to teach. Um, so this is one from the Passion Week. We've had quite a number from the Passion Week, haven't we? So this is the Passion Week. In fact, it's the first day of the Passion Week in our story in Mark 11. It's the day when Jesus approaches Jerusalem for the triumphal entry. And if you want to, you can read the context of our story, our sandwich, by reading the first 11 verses from Mark 11, and I've sent it so that you can get that context of where this all fits in. And by the end of the story in verse 11, Jesus gets to the temple where he's supposed to be going, where the Old Testament tells us that the Messiah is going to come. He's going to come to the temple when he arrives. But he goes in, no one's there to welcome him. We know what he sees because we're going to be given that information the next day, and he just walks right out. He goes to Bethany. And Bethany is on the other side of the Mount of Olives. There's Jerusalem on Mount Zion, and then there's another mountain, which is called the Mount of Olives, and on the Mount of Olives is Gethsemane. And on the other side of the Mount of Olives, there's Bethany. So Jesus has to go over a mountain, and then go into the next mountain, Jerusalem. And that's where we start with the first slice of bread. On the next day, when they had left Bethany, remember he's staying there overnight, he became hungry. I want you to remember that. He's hungry. He wants to eat something. But that's not why he gets angry. Watch what happens. Seeing at a distance a fig tree in leaf, he went to see if perhaps he would find anything on it. Now, he knows about fig trees. He knows the season and that there's 2 seasons for figs. And so he's expecting to find some figs. Now, we'll find out what kind of figs they are and why he's expecting this. And when he came to it, he found nothing but leaves, for it was not yet the season for the ripe figs. He said to it, "May no one ever eat fruit from you again." And his disciples were listening. They're just listening. Let's see if they get it. See, there's 2 seasons. Now, I got this from archaeological books that I have, and they're recent books, and they're done by very eminent archaeologists, so we can take this as the truth. And there's a first or early season, the time when Jesus was entering Jerusalem, about April. There would be leaves with small, hard, barely edible figs on it. This is called the first season. So there would be leaves, and there would be these hard, barely edible figs that most people would just pass by unless they were really, really hungry. Now, Jesus would know this, and he would be expecting those small, hard figs, And he would have been hungry because, of course, he's a man and he gets hungry. He would have been hungry and he would have wanted even these small. And you know yourself, when you're hungry, you could eat a cow, right? You could eat just about anything, even things you don't like, especially if you're really, really hungry. And that is what it says he was. The second season would be, again, in August, in late summer, when the more mature, softer, sweeter figs would be on the tree. Now, here's what Jesus knew, that there was the possibility of these small, hard figs, unseasonable figs, would be there. But if they weren't there, and Jesus knew this, there would be no second season. There would be no mature, soft, sweet figs in August. It was just dead. That's what he knew. So what does he do? He curses the fig tree. The cleansing of the temple that's going to happen in the next section is going to also denote the temple's disqualification. And it's going to warn the curse that's on the temple, because there was no fruit, not even a first season fruit. That's how bad it was. So let's look at what it says. The lunch meat. Then they came to Jerusalem and entered the temple, and he began to cast out those who were buying and selling in the temple. That word cast out, it's the same word used of Jesus casting out demons throughout the book. Remember, the demons are cast out more often in the book of Mark than in any of the other Gospels. So he's casting out these men just as he cast out demons, which gives you a really bad picture of what these men were like in the eyes of Jesus, right? Those who were buying and selling in the temple, and overturned the tables of the money changers and the seats of those who were selling doves. So let's see, he's entered the temple. Not the temple proper, where the worship was going to be for the Jews. He's not there. That's too small. What he was entering was the huge court of the temples that was for Gentiles to use for worship, for prayer. And they have taken over the court of the Gentiles with all these animals and money and tables. Now, what's going on here? Why are the Jewish leaders putting up these tables for buying and selling and merchandising in the court of the Gentiles? Well, what had happened in about 30 AD, which is around the time where Jesus is going to be crucified, is that previous to this, in other years, they had been buying and selling on the side of the Mount of Olives. All the animals would have been there, the store, and this would have been proper. People didn't want to be bringing with them the animals. It was an arduous trip for many of them, a distant trip for many of them, and it would have been easier to get a lamb or the turtle doves from right there, and this would not have been a problem, and it wasn't a problem until now, when Caiaphas, the high priest, decided that he could make more money if he set up tables and had the merchandising done there. So there was still merchandising done by others on the Mount of Olives, but now the priests were involved in bringing in more money for the temple. Of course, they excused it by saying this is God's work, and that's what we're doing, and so we need to do this here and bring in money for the work of the Lord, right? But it wasn't what they should have been done. They should have known Scripture, and that's what Jesus is going to bring out. There they are in the court of the Gentiles. And where are the Gentiles supposed to go? Far away and be cooped up where they aren't. This was a place for Gentiles to worship. They weren't allowed to go into the temple proper, you know. The court where the sacrifices would have been done, the inner part, the holy place where the priests would have gone in, and of course not the Holy of Holies. But all that was there. The Gentiles would not have. In fact, there were signs, no Gentiles beyond this point. We've got those signs. Archaeologists have unearthed those signs. But in the court of the Gentiles, they figured they were safe to do all this buying and selling and merchandising. No. So Jesus is going to do something extraordinary. He would watch what it says here again. He overturned the tables of the money changers and the seats of those who were selling doves. Doves. Let's stop right there. In the book of John, we're told that there were also sheep and goats and animals for sacrifice for the Passover. And it included doves in its list of those animals that were there. But here in Mark and in Matthew's story, we're not given, and Luke's story, we're not given that list. But in Matthew and Mark, it does talk about the doves. And in John, it talks about the doves. And we have to try to figure out what's so important about the doves that 3 of the 4 Gospels mentions them. And we have, and I want you to look this up, in Matthew 21:12 and John 2:13-16, we have the mention of those doves. Now, why the doves? Why is he so upset about the doves, as well as the other animals, but pointedly about the doves? It's because when the poor couldn't afford the sheep to bring, they could bring turtle doves or just the doves. And that's what Joseph and Mary brought. Remember in the story of Luke that they brought the turtle doves for their sacrifice? The poor were being manipulated. Really, they would have been sold these doves for a very high price. And that was wrong to do. Do you ever notice that? Then when there's a problem in the economy, the poor are the ones who get hurt the most. The prices go up in Acme, and who can't afford it? The poor. Well, it's always been that way. Jesus was overturning the tables, and part of it was because the poor were being hurt, and the other part was because the Gentiles were being hurt. They were using it, these religious leaders, as a place of merchandise. And Jesus began to teach and say to them, "Is it not written, my house shall be called a house of prayer for all nations? But you have made it a robber's den." Now what he has done is taking 2 scriptures from the Old Testament and linked them together. And rabbis did that in that day to prove a point. And what they would do is take 2 scriptures that had a common word or phrase in them and link them together to prove their point. So it had to have common words. Okay? And he has two scripture put together. But we're going to have to look at the context of these scriptures to see that Jesus has brought together two scriptures that have a common word. Okay? But you have made it a robber's den, and we're going to get to it. The chief priests and the scribes heard this and began seeking how to destroy him, for they were afraid of him, for the whole crowd was astonished at his teaching. And keep going. As when evening came, they would go out of the city. So we have our lunch meat, but we have to stop and look at the last page that I sent you. And this last page has the two scriptures in the context, in its context. So let's look at it. Jeremiah 7:6-11 says this: if you do not oppress the alien, the foreigner, the Gentile, the orphan or the widow, and do not shed innocent blood in this place. And he's talking about the land God had promised them. That's the place. Nor walk after other gods to your own ruin. Then I will let you dwell in this place, this land that God had given you. In the land, see, it's demonstrating, that I gave to your fathers forever and ever. Behold, you are trusting in deceptive words to no avail. Will you steal, murder, commit adultery, swear falsely, offer sacrifices to Baal, and walk after other gods? Oh my goodness, this is 6 out of the 10 of the 10 commandments. He's saying, you're doing these things that you have not, other gods that you have not known. And then you come and stand before me in this house, which is called by my name, and you say, we're delivered, so that you may continue to do these things? Watch what he's saying. Do you think that I will deliver you just so you can continue these evil deeds? That's what he's saying. You think that just because you're in the temple, just because you're the religious leaders, that you can continue to do these evil things, and I'm going to deliver you so that you can go back to doing these evil deeds? Watch this. Has this house, here it is, this house, which is called by my name, become a den of robbers in your sight? You see the context? They've made it a den of robbers. Behold, even I have seen it, declares the Lord. I've looked at this. I've seen you do this. I've watched you. You can't hide this. I remember doing that with my kids. I saw you doing it. You can't deny it. I watched you doing it. Do you remember doing that with your kids? Now watch how he has linked this verse in Jeremiah with verses from Isaiah 56. Also, the foreigners, God speaks. Now, foreigners are aliens. They're Gentiles who join themselves to Yahweh to minister to him and to love the name of Yahweh, to be his servants. Everyone who keeps from profaning the Sabbath and holds fast my covenant, even if they're Gentiles, foreigners, aliens, if they do this, even those foreigners, I will bring to my holy mountain and make them joyful in my house of prayer. There it is, house. And remember what Jesus had said back in the previous page. My house shall be called a house of prayer for all nations. Watch what he says, and make them joyful in my house of prayer. There, that is, the foreigners who join themselves to Yahweh, burnt offerings and their sacrifices will be acceptable on my altar. For my house will be called a house of prayer for all peoples. Here it is, the two quotes in context right here. And what's the linking word? House. What does that word mean? Temple. That's where Jesus went in. That's where Jesus saw them using the house of prayer, the house for foreigners and aliens, as a house of merchandising, like it's a den of robbers. There they are. What's a den of robbers? It's the hiding place for thieves. What is he saying? His house of prayer has become a hiding place for thieves. They're stealing, and they're stealing from the Gentiles their place to worship. They're stealing from the poor by selling at exorbitant prices the doves. Do you see why Jesus is angry? They are the figs that are hard even, but they're not even there. No fruit in these religious leaders, and the temple is not producing fruit. And so, the second slice of bread. As they were passing by in the morning, they saw the fig tree withered from the roots up. Being reminded, Peter said to him, Rabbi, look, the fig tree which you cursed has withered. See, the fig tree incident brackets the temple scene. The fruitless fig tree pictures the dysfunctional activities happening in the temple. And the temple is cursed like the fig tree. And the temple made up of the church will replace it in 70 AD. As I look at the temple in Jeremiah's day and in Jesus' day, it reminds me of what Jesus had to say to the first century churches in the book of Revelation. Remember the first 3 chapters? Jesus admonishes 5 of the 7 churches, doesn't he? And Jesus wonders in Luke 18. He wonders this, when the Son of Man comes, that's the return of Jesus, will he find faith on the earth? Is he going to find faith when he returns? Shall we be the people of faith that Jesus finds when he returns?